All right. So 3.8, we are talking about graphing absolute value functions. Okay, graphing absolute value. We haven't graphed absolute value. It's going to be pretty similar to what we've done recently. In fact, there's really two main things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about transformations. We're going to talk about actual graphing. Okay. Let's start with a parent function. The most basic, the simplest version of an absolute value function. It's going to be f of x is equal to the absolute value of x. Okay, this is the simplest version of our equation, of our functions here. Let's figure out what this is going to look like on a graph. What I would like you to do is I would like you to plug in -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Let's see what we get out of those y values. Okay, what do you think we get out for those y values? What do we get?
2, 1, 0, 1, and 2.
There you go. All right, we plug in a -2, absolute value -2 is 2. Absolute value -1 is 1. And we see it there. So when we go to graph this, we're going to have -2, 2, -1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. It is going to be a V shape. So absolute value functions are always V shaped. Okay, they're always V shaped for absolute value. Okay, so that's always going to be the case. We have that V shape. Great.
Will it always be like a perfect V like that, or does it like look a little different?
It's going to be symmetrical. The two sides are going to be the same. Yeah, they might be. It might be flatter. It might be steeper. It might be moved, but the two sides are going to be the same. Yep. All right. Yeah.
Will the like midpoint change?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Remember, this is just the most basic version. Right?
Like, can it like rotate onto its side? Like
It will not be this way. No. The only way we would have this is if the y value had an absolute value. That's not functional. Right? We can see this. We can see it this way. Spread out and moved. Right? And we'll see. We'll take a look. Okay. Just wanted to show you what that basic version is going to look like. Okay. All right. Here's what I would like you to do. I want you to graph one on your own. Let's say g of x is equal to the absolute value of x plus 2. Let's plug in those same 5 numbers. Take the absolute value and then add the 2. Yeah, when you plug those numbers in, you take the absolute value first, then you're adding the 2. What you got? That's your y value. See a lot of you guys graphing, perfect. Okay, double check with somebody, make sure they got the same y values before you graph it too much here. Make sure you got the same thing as some light.
What you get?
All right, as you're finishing that up, what are my y values going to be here? Tram?
4, 3,
There you go. So when I graph it, it'll look something like that. Okay. Good. We're taking the absolute value first, getting that number, it's a positive, I'm adding 2. There you go. So now, being the bright young minds that you are, what about my equation can tell me where that graph is going to be located? Ready?
2.
Okay, what does that 2 represent? You're right, the 2 is going to tell us where it's located, but what does that 2 represent here, Gwen? It is a y-intercept. It is, yeah. What else? Yeah.
It's how many dashes above the x.
Okay, it is. It is. I'm looking for one specific thing here, Bree.
Vertical translation.
Is a vertical translation. Everything that we talked about in terms of transformations applies still. Okay, instead of parentheses, now it's absolute value sign. But everything stays the same. So if I've got plus or minus something on the outside, that's just a vertical translation, up or down. And that's, you can see it here. I just took my original and I shifted it up 2. Right? That was a vertical translation up 2. So all of those things that we talked about, vertical translation, horizontal translation, reflections, the stretch or shrink, all of that stuff still applies here. And so that's half of what you're going to be asked to do is just, here's an equation, what transformations are occurring. Right? Which is exactly what we just did, right? Over the last couple days. So without graphing, let's just take a look at this. Without graphing, tell the person next to you what 3 transformations are occurring in that graph.
Oh, it's the reflection.
All right, here we go. Raise your hand, give me one of them. I told you there were 3. Give me one of them here, right?
Vertical translate. Oh no, sorry. Horizontal translation to the left 4.
Perfect. Horizontal translation to the left 4. That's inside the absolute value. Horizontal. It's the opposite of what we see. We are going to the left 4 them. Okay. What else, Jack? Reflection over the x-axis. It's a negative on the outside, so it's a reflection over the x. Great.
Vertical stretch by factor of 2.
Perfect. Vertical stretch by a factor of 2 because we are multiplying on the outside. So again, all the stuff that we saw the last 2 lessons, the last 2 days, still applies here. But instead of parentheses, it's going to be inside or outside of the absolute value sign. Okay. So I don't think we need to go over that anymore. Do we? Are we good there? Transformations? I think we're okay with that. If you are still struggling on transformations, then make sure you're asking questions on it. Okay. But we're going to move on to just graphing and making sure we can graph correctly. Now, we said that the absolute value function is always going to be a V shape, which means we need to have a V shape on our graph. If we don't have a V shape, we're not done. We did it wrong, or we're in the wrong spot, or something. Okay. Can we turn off their ESPN alerts, please? Or, just turn the phone off in general. Thank you. Before I have to take it. All right, so let's say that we have, just grab it and turn it off, man. You don't have to sneak around, just turn it off. We all knew it was you. So let's look at the equation here. Let's go x minus 3. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Okay, I would like you to plug in those 5 numbers into there and see what you get out for your y values. Okay, plug those 5 numbers in. Remember, we are subtracting first and then taking the absolute value. Find those y values, please. Okay, so I take a -2, I plug it in, -2 minus 3 is -5. Absolute value of -5 is 5.
Oh, I messed up.
Oh, wait.
Right, so I take the absolute value of it, so now it's positive. Okay, I do the same thing with -1. -1 minus 3 is -4. Absolute value of -4, 4. What are my other numbers going to be?
3, 2, 1. Oh, absolutely.
Blast out. So
Not a B.
it's not a B, right? Now, we did everything correct. We did everything correct. Okay, we plugged in the numbers right, all of that. But now we look at this graph and we are looking at, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're here, here, here. Sorry, here, here, here. We're looking at a straight line. It's not a B. Okay, we plugged the numbers in correctly. We just didn't plug in the correct numbers.
What?
Okay, so this is where absolute value is different than a line, because a line, we can graph any part of that line, so it doesn't matter what numbers we plug in, because we're always going to see a line. But if we want to see an absolute value, we want to see the V shape, we need to find that V shape. We need to have the middle of the V shape. So the most important part of graphing here is being able to find where is that middle of the V going to be. Can you tell me, based off of this, where the middle of the V, the bottom of that V is going to be? Alistair?
Well, if you plug in 3 for X, it gives-
Yeah, if I plug in a 3 for X, I get a 0, right? So that's going to be that bottom of that V, because now I start plugging in bigger numbers. A 4 gives me a 1 again. Now I'm going back up. Right? So I found that middle number. So it would be a pain in the neck if we were always going to start with those 5 numbers and then just keep going until we found the V, right? That would be a huge pain and a huge waste of time. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to find that middle number first. And to find that middle number, just like Alistair told us, we want what's inside the absolute value to equal 0. If you can figure out what number is going to make the absolute value equal 0, that's the middle number that we want to plug in. All right, so let me write this down. We want to find what number will make the absolute value equal 0. That is the most important part of today. That is the big takeaway, and that's our first step. Is you need to find what number is going to make the absolute value equal 0, because that's going to give us the middle number that we want to plug in. Great.
So then for the one where there's stuff on the outside, but that it's in the parentheses, I mean the absolute value bar, it's just an X, so you just plug in 0.
Exactly.
But then it's still a 2 because there's just like that extra 2.
Yep. So if we look at this one, right, we want to know what's going to make the absolute value equal 0, and that's 0, right? So that tells me my middle number is 0. I got 2 on either side. But now when I plug it in, now I got to worry about the whole thing, right? When I'm just looking at what numbers am I going to plug in, I'm only looking at inside the absolute value. So here, if I was doing this problem over again, I look at this, I say, all right, what value is going to make the absolute value equal 0? I know it's going to be a 3. So that's going to be the middle number that I plug in. And so I'm going to plug in 2 numbers on either side. Okay, and then when I see that, I'm going to end up with that V shape. If you choose the right number to plug in, you will always get that V shape, and it's going to be nice and easy because your first 2 numbers, your last 2 numbers are going to be the same. Your Y values, as long as you found the right X value. Okay. So let's say I should tell the person next to you, what 5 numbers are you going to plug in for X here?
Eight, 9,
Right, here we go. Raise your hand. Tell me what numbers. Go ahead, please. What numbers are we going to plug in here, Lucy?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay, somebody other than Lucy, tell me why are these the 5 numbers that we want? Here.
Because that's what
Yeah, we want that to equal 0. A 7 is going to make that equal 0. And then 2 numbers on either side. Good. Yeah.
So how would that work from there, like solving it, like 2 times 0 plus 15
For that number, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And then
So if I plug in a 7, right, it'd be 0, 2 times 0 is 0, plus 14 is 14.
and then so on.
And then so on. Let's plug in an 8, right? 8 minus 7 is 1. Absolute value of 1 is 1. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus 14 is 16. Okay? So the other times we've seen it's been going up or down by 1. Now it's going by 2. Because I got that 2 out there, really.
Yeah.
Because it's a stretch, right? Everything's times 2. So I plug in a 9. 9 minus 7 is 2. Absolute value of 2 is 2. Times it is 4. It'd be 18. Now I should get those same 2 numbers on the top. As long as you've done the math right, you should get the same thing. Okay, now on a quiz or a test, I would double check. I would plug those numbers in just to make sure. But as long as you did everything correctly, we should see that pattern on both sides. Great.
So it's the V, it's like always gonna be linear. Well, not like.
Each side is going to be
Yeah.
linear. Yes. Yep. Because it's a V, it's not a U where it
Yeah.
curves, it's going to be straight.
It's a linear function.
Each half is a linear function. We don't call this linear because it's kind of made up of 2 lines. Was it?
So the 2 numbers that are not in the middle are gonna be the same.
Correct. These 2 and these 2 should be the same. As long as you pick the right numbers to plug in. And yeah. Yep. Okay, so that's the biggest thing is getting that first number, getting that middle number correct. Then we can start plugging in. We can get the other parts. Okay. Any questions right now on our graphing of absolute value? Okay. What could I change about this equation to make it so that the V was upside down? What could I change about the equation? Tell the person next to you, what would you change about the equation?
or adding.
No, just put it back in the.
I think it's
Okay, here we go. So again, the question was, what can I do to my equation? What can I do to my equation to make it so this V is now upside down? That's the question.
So, instead of plugging in like a positive 5 or a positive 6 or positive 7, plug it in as a negative, so then when you get like the absolute value, then it's a
but the absolute value is still gonna make it positive, all right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what number I plug in for x, this is going to be positive times 2 plus 14. That's still going to give me that positive. That positive. Okay, kind of
Make it a -2.
make it a -2. Remember that negative outside tells me it's a reflection over the x. So I would take all of these, right? And they would become negative. It's not going to be exactly negatives, but once I multiply here, it's a negative plus 14. So it's going to end up being somewhere like this. Whoa.
Oh.
Okay, and we should know that. Look at the transformation. That's to the right 7. That's up 14. So that's where my center is. To the right 7, up 14. And then I know it's a stretch and it's reflected. So it's going to come down that way. So we should be able to look at the transformations and make sure it makes sense what we have. Because we know those transformations.
How would we put something like the first page?
You'd have to have a negative on front,
Okay.
either a negative or a -1. Yep. Okay, last thing, sorry. Last thing. I want you on your page, I want you to create an absolute value equation that has been translated 6 units to the right. 6 units to the right with a horizontal translation. I want you to create that equation. What would it look like if I'm translating 6 units to the right?
wait.
You are going to see questions or a couple questions like this.
Well, no, making it.
You're going to have to make the absolute value.
50% sure.
Talk to somebody about it.
I think
What
it's
do you
mine.
think?
Yeah, when you add it goes to the left, and then when you minus, it goes to the right. But it won't be inside the parentheses, right? Or inside the actual value.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Raise your hand and tell me, what is that equation going to look like? Fran, what do you got? There you go. That's the value of x by 6, right? Is that easy? Hey, you are going to have to create this on big ideas. There is a button that will do the absolute value for you. Okay. All right, any questions about it? No? All right, you guys are good.